east of the range of hills skirting the valleys, and so to proceed through Petra and Shobek and Karik to Hesbon in Moab. This was the route followed by all the caravans. Villages would be found at very short distances, and there was no difficulty whatever about water. "My camels," he said, "can go long distances without water, and could take the valley route, but the horses would suffer greatly." Jethro was glad to hear that the journey was likely to be less toilsome than he had anticipated, and all the arrangements having been concluded, the party started soon after dawn on the day at first fixed upon. The girls were still in male attire, and rode in large baskets, slung one on each side of a camel. The camel driver walked at the head of the animal, leading it by a cord. Its fellows followed in a long line, each fastened to the one before it. Jethro, Amuba, and Chebron, all armed with bows and arrows, as well as swords, rode beside the girl's camel. Half the escort went on ahead, the other half formed the rear guard. "Which is the most dangerous part of the journey?" Jethro asked the camel driver. "That on which we are now entering," he replied. "Once we arrive at Petra we are comparatively safe, but this portion of the journey passes over a rough and uninhabited country, and it is across this line that the wandering tribesmen pass in their journeys to or from the pastures round Mount Sinai. The steep hills on our left form at once a hiding place and a lookout. There they can watch for travelers passing along this road, and swoop down upon them." "How long shall we be reaching Petra?" "It is 3 days' fair traveling; but as the beasts are fresh, by journeying well on to sundown we could accomplish it in 2 days. After that we can travel at our ease; the villages lie but a few miles apart." "Let us push on, then, by all means," said Jethro. "We can stay a day at Petra to rest the beasts, but let us get through this desolate and dangerous country as soon as we can." The girls had been greatly amused at first by the appearance of the strange animal that was carrying them, but they soon found that the swinging action was extremely fatiguing, and they would have gladly got down and walked. Jethro, however, said that this could not be, for the pace of the animal, deliberate though it seemed, was yet too great for them to keep up with on foot, and it was needful for the first 2 days to push on at full speed. The sun blazed with tremendous force, and was reflected from the black rock of the hills and the white sand lying between the stones that everywhere strewed the plain along which they were traveling, and the heat was terrible. After traveling for 3 hours they halted for an hour, and Jethro managed, with the poles that had been brought to form the framework of tents, and some cloths, to fasten an awning over the baskets in which the girls were riding. The camels had lain down as soon as they halted, and the girls stepped into the baskets before they arose. They gave a simultaneous cry as the animal rose. They had prepared for him to rise on his forelegs, and when his hind quarter suddenly rose in the air, they were almost thrown from their baskets. "I don't like this creature a bit," Mysa said as they moved on. "Who would suppose that he was going to get up the wrong way first? Besides, why does he keep on grumbling? I am sure that Ruth and I cannot be such a very heavy load for such a great beast. I believe he would have bit us as we got in if the driver had not jerked the rope at its head. It must be much nicer to sit on a horse. I am sure that looks easy enough." "It is not so easy as it looks, Mysa," Chebron replied. "Besides, you know women never do ride horses." "They do in our country," Amuba said. "When we get there, Mysa, I will teach you how to sit on them." "Ah, it is a long way off, Amuba," Mysa replied, "and I believe this creature has made up his mind to shake us to pieces as soon as he can." "You should not try to sit stiff," Jethro said. "Sit quite easily, and sway backward and forward with the motion of the basket. You will soon get accustomed to it, and will find that ere long you will be able to sleep as if in a cradle." They traveled on until the sun was just sinking, and then prepared to camp for the night. They had brought with them several skins of water, and from these a scanty drink was given to each of the horses. A few handfuls of grain were also served out to each. The drivers stuck their spears firmly into the ground and to these fastened them. The camels were made to kneel down so as to form a square. In the center of this the tent was pitched for the girls, the horses being arranged in a circle outside. The men had all brought with them flat cakes, and with these and a handful of dates they made their meal, and there was no occasion for lighting a fire, for Jethro's party had brought an ample store of cooked provisions for their own use. In a short time quiet reigned in the camp. The journey had been a hot and fatiguing one, and the men wrapping themselves in their cloaks lay down, each by his spear, and were soon asleep, with the exception of 4 who took their posts as sentries. Jethro had agreed with Amuba and Chebron that they also would divide the night between them, taking it by turns to keep watch. The men of the escort were, however, of opinion that there was very little probability of any attack before morning, even had they been watched by a party among the hills. "They could hardly hope to take us by surprise, for they would be sure that we should set a watch in the darkness. They could not make their way down the hills without some noise. Besides, they believe that the powers of evil are potent at night, and seldom stir out of their camps after dark. If we are attacked at all, it is likely to be just before sunrise." Jethro had therefore arranged that Chebron should keep the first watch, Amuba the second, and that he himself would take charge 4 hours before daylight. The night passed without any cause for alarm. As soon as daylight broke the camp was astir. Another ration of water and grain was served out to the horses, a hasty meal was made by the men, and just as the sun rose the cavalcade moved on. They had journeyed but half a mile, when from behind a spur of the hills running out in the plain a large party was seen to issue forth. There must have been fully 100 of them, of whom some 20 were mounted and the rest on foot. The travelers halted and had a short consultation. Jethro with one of the escort then rode out to meet the advancing party, waving a white cloth in token of amity. 2 of the Arabs rode forward to meet them. It was some time before Jethro returned to the party, who were anxiously awaiting the termination of the colloquy. "What do they say, Jethro?" Amuba asked as he rode up. "He says, to begin with, that we ought to have purchased from him the right of traveling across the country. I said that I would gladly have paid a moderate sum had I been aware that such was required, but that as he was not in Ælana I could not tell that he claimed such a right. At the same time I was ready to make an offer of 4 rolls of Egyptian cloth. He rejected the offer with scorn, and after a long conversation let me know pretty plainly that he intended to take all our goods and animals, and that we might think ourselves fortunate in being allowed to pursue our way on foot. I said that I would consult my friends, that if they agreed to his terms we would keep the white flag flying, if we refused them we would lower it." "Then you may as well lower it at once, Jethro," Amuba said. "We might as well be killed at once as be plundered of all we possess by these Arab rascals. Besides, as there are 23 of us, and all well armed, we ought to be able to cut our way through them. At the worst the girls could mount behind us, and we could make a circuit so as to avoid the footmen, and if the horsemen ventured to attack us we could soon give a good account of them." "Yes, but we should lose our 7 camel loads of goods, and we shall want them for trade as we go along," Jethro said. "I propose that we should form the camels into a square, as we did last night, that you 2 and 6 of the men armed with bows and arrows shall occupy it and take care of the girls, while the rest of us charge the Arabs. If we can defeat the horsemen it is probable that the men on foot will draw off. But while we are doing so some of those on foot may rush forward and attack you. We will take care not to pursue, and you can rely upon our coming to your assistance as soon as you are attacked." "I think that is the best plan, Jethro. We can keep them off for some time with our bows and arrows, for certainly Chebron and I can bring down a man with each shot at 100 yards." Jethro chose 6 of the men who professed themselves to be good archers. Their horses' legs were tied and the animals thrown down just outside the square formed by the kneeling camels. Strict instructions were given to the girls to lie down, and the saddles and bales were arranged outside the camels to shield them from missiles. Then when all was prepared the white flag was lowered, and Jethro with his 14 men rode at full gallop against the Arabs. Trusting to their somewhat superior numbers the Arab horsemen advanced to meet them, but Jethro's party, obeying his orders to keep in a close line together with their spears leveled in front of them, rode right over the Arabs, who came up singly and without order. Men and horses rolled over together, several of the former transfixed by the spears of the horsemen. Jethro called upon his men to halt and turned upon the Arabs. Some of the latter fled toward the footmen, who were running up to their assistance, but were pursued and cut down. Others fought to the last silently and desperately, but these too were slain. As soon as the footmen approached they opened fire with slings and stones. Jethro rallied his men and formed them in line again, and at their head charged the Arabs. The latter fought steadily. Giving way for a moment, they closed in round the little party of horsemen, throwing their javelins and hacking at them with their swords. Jethro spurred his horse into their midst, dealing blows